Okay, we're back to Taylor's dissertation on Aristotle's philosophy, and we are moving into chapter 15 on Aristotle's concept of time. So it'll be good to get away from the vacuum, at least for now. Let us, in the next place, direct our attention to the admirable manner in which time is discussed and unfolded by the Stagirite, subjoining also the commentary of Simplicius. It now remains, quotation of Aristotle, it now remains, as consequent to what has been said, that we should speak concerning time. In the first place, then, it will be well to doubt concerning it, through exoteric reasons, whether it ranks among beings or among non-entities, and in the next place, to consider what its nature is. Okay, so footnote 5, should speak concerning time. This is, I guess, technically written by Taylor, but I assume taking liberally from Simplicius, because he'll quote Simplicius sometimes directly. I think these footnotes are like paraphrasing Simplicius. It's not totally clear. 5. That a discourse concerning motion is most proper to a physiologist is manifest, since nature is a principle of motion. But if all motion is in time, and some philosophers have been of opinion that time is motion itself, but others that it is something belonging to motion, it is evident that a discourse concerning time is necessary to a physiologist. For time is perspicuous and obvious to all men, though an accurate knowledge of its nature is concealed from the multitude. It likewise follows everything natural and in generation in the same manner as motion. Hence, a discourse concerning time deserves the attention of the physiologist. But Aristotle, having spoken concerning motion in the third book, and conjoined with it the consideration of the infinite, since motion is continued, and the continued is divisible to infinity, and is either infinite or finite, this being the case, since all motion is produced in place and time, and since he has spoken concerning place, and has added a discourse about a vacuum, he very properly says that the discussion of time is consequent to what has been said. But time is attended with something wonderful, partly in common with other things, and partly peculiar to itself. For as color and motion have an obvious existence, I'm going to zoom out even more, because, okay, actually this will work just fine. I'm trying to fix the screen share. All right. Something wonderful, partly peculiar to itself, for as color and motion have an obvious existence, but it is difficult to apprehend the nature of their essence, thus also the existence of time is manifest, not only to the wise, but likewise to all men. For we all speak of the younger and older, of yesterday and today, of tomorrow and formerly, and of this year and the following. But what man appears to be ignorant of days and nights, of months and years? But if it is asked what time is, the wisest man can scarcely answer the question. And this, indeed, it has in common with other things. But it has this peculiar to itself, that its essence cannot be apprehended by sense, though it possesses certain auxiliaries from sense. For older and younger are not sensible objects, nor yesterday and today, though at the same time they appear very evident to all men. So dubious, indeed, has the investigation of its essence appeared to be, that some being darkened by it have entirely denied the existence of time, though it is so conspicuous. It is, however, absurd to subvert the existence of a thing through ignorance of its essence, for there are many things of which we are not only ignorant what they are, but likewise whether they are, and yet they nevertheless rank among beings. And then back to Aristotle in the first place, then it will be well to doubt concerning it through exoteric reasons. And footnote 6, exoteric reasons, says Simplicius, are such as are common, and are produced from opinion, but are not demonstrative, and achromatic. Not sure what achromatic means. It's probably a obsolete term, but let's go ahead and just achromatic. Adjective that means something is conveyed orally to chosen followers. It's arcane or esoteric. Achromatic. Interesting. Conveyed orally to chosen followers. Achromatic. All right. Back up here. Whether it ranks among beings or among non-entities, and in the next place to consider what its nature is. That time, therefore, in short, is not, or that it scarcely and obscurely is, may be suspected from the following considerations. One part of it was and is not. Another part is future and is not yet. But from these parts, infinite time, and which is always assumed, is composed. That, however, which is composed from things that are not, does not appear to be ever capable of participating of essence. To which may be added, it is necessary with respect to everything partible, if it should have a subsistence, that either some or all of its parts should be when it is. But of time, some of the parts are past, others are future, and no part is in consequence of time being divisible. But the now, or an instant, so a part then is, he assumes, is having necessarily a kind of thickness. An instant is not a part. Okay, yeah, he's actually about to say that. This follows from, like we were just looking at Euclid, his definition of a part involves a number, so there has to be like a magnitude of the part. You can't have an infinitely divisible part of something. But the now, or an instant, is not a part of time, for a part measures, and it is necessary that the whole should be composed from the parts. But time does not appear to be composed from instants. Because an instant is supposed to be instantaneous, there's no duration that it's composed of. If it had a duration, then that could be a part of time, and that could be measured in. But mathematically, like, something that has zero thickness can't measure something that has some finite length. So that's why an instant doesn't appear to compose the timeline. Instants don't, and then time, or an instant can't measure time. Besides, with respect to this, now which appears to be... let me try that again. Besides, with respect to this, now which appears to bound and separate the past and the future, whether it always remains one and the same, or is another and another, it is not easy to see. Whether the present, which is the bound of the past and the future, is always one and the same present, or whether it changes, is not clear. For if it is always another and another, but there is no part of time which is at once another and another, and of which one part does not comprehend and another is comprehended, just as the less is comprehended by the greater time, but that which now is not, but was before, must necessarily once have perished. If this be the case, instants cannot subsist together with each other, but the prior instant must always have necessarily perished. It is not possible, therefore, that it can have perished in itself, because it then is. Neither is it possible that a prior now can perish in another now, for let it be impossible for instants to adhere to each other in the same manner as it is impossible for a point to adhere to a point. Aristotle argues that same point vigorously in his treatise on indivisible lines. Lines are not made from points. He's very insistent. If, therefore, it does not perish in that which is successive, but in another, it will at one and the same time be in the intermediate instants which are infinite. But this is impossible. And we can hope that Simplicius/Taylor makes that a little bit clearer. Aristotle, first assuming the now as being, demonstrates that it is not a part of time, and afterwards endeavors to show that neither the now, which appears to bound the past and the future and to separate them from each other, is anything. For it is necessary, if the now is, either that it should be the same or another, and another. I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean. If therefore it is neither the same nor another and another. Oh, I see. Another and another, he was saying successive instance. So is the now always the same now, or is it like one now, another now, another now? If therefore it is neither the same nor another and another, it evidently is not. In the first place, therefore, he shows that it is not another and another as follows. If the now is another and another, it is necessary that the former now should be corrupted, but it is impossible for the now to be corrupted. The now, therefore, is not another and another. And I didn't quite catch the reasoning, but I guess you could say an instant not going through time has, like, the only place for it to be corrupted is in itself, but then in itself, we're positing that it exists. So it can't be corrupted in the same instant it exists, or else it exists and is not corrupted or not destroyed. So it can't be that the now passes, because there's no time for instants to degrade away. The now, therefore, is not another and another. And Aristotle indeed shows the conclusion from the prior and posterior now not subsisting together. For it is impossible for two times to subsist together, unless the one is more and the other less, and the one comprehends but the other is comprehended, as a year with respect to a month in it, and a month with respect to a day in it. For because the day of this month is present, the month also is said to be present. So, except for that technical way of speaking, a time can't occupy the same time as another time. But that's really for the purpose of talking about these instants not being able to do that. And thus they appear to subsist together, but it is not possible in nows or instants that the one should contain and the other be contained, or that one should be a part and the other a whole, or that the one should be more than the other. For they are not quantities, but the beginnings of quantities, and the more is in quantities. Hence, they cannot subsist together, but it is necessary, if the now is another and another, that the former now should be corrupted, for that which, having been before, is not afterwards, is corrupted. So we have a tension there. Seems that whichever way you go, there are impossibilities. In the next place, Aristotle proves the assumption when he says it is impossible for the now to perish, and he proves this from division. For if it were corrupted, since that which is corrupted in time, it must either be corrupted in itself or in another now. But it is impossible it should be corrupted in itself, for it is then, or rather it then is. If therefore it is corrupted in another, since nows or instants do not adhere to each other, for time is not composed of instants, which he now supposes, but demonstrates afterwards, if this be the case, it will be corrupted in another now, which exists between it and that in which it was. But the immediate nows are time, just as a line is between points. It was therefore in the intermediate time. But in the intermediate time, there are infinite nows. If all time is divisible to infinity, as will be shown, and is divided according to nows, the now, therefore, will subsist together with those infinite nows which are in the intermediate time. But neither is the now corrupted in the intermediate time, for if this were the case, it would be requisite that some part of the now should be corrupted in each part of it. But the now is impartible, so that it will neither be corrupted in an instant nor in the intermediate time. Besides, if the now is corrupted in some time different from itself, either that time is a now, and thus two nows will subsist together, that which is corrupted and that which it is, or that in which it is corrupted, or it is time and is either past or future. But if past time, the now was corrupted before it existed, and if future time, the now will not yet be corrupted, but will always be about to be corrupted. for that in which it is corrupted is always about to be. And in short, time is past and future. But if the now were corrupted in time, the impartible would be coextended with the partible. So it's impossible that the now be corrupted. So the instant, the now, can't be another and another, always replacing itself. So presumably then it should be one now. But then one now can't be divided and occupy multiple instants because we can't have time stacked in time in that way. So going on with Aristotle, neither is it possible for the same instant always to remain, for there is not one boundary of any finite divisible thing, neither if it should be continuous to one thing, nor if to many. For there is not one boundary of any finite divisible thing. Oh, I see. Yeah. So, like a shape, any finite divisible object will have multiple boundaries, multiple sides. But time being instantaneous the now being instantaneous and impartible, can't have a boundary in that same sense. Because I think that's what it's saying. For there is not one boundary of any finite divisible thing, neither if it should be continuous to one thing, nor if to many. But the now is a boundary, and a finite time may be assumed. Again, if a simultaneous subsistence according to time, and to be neither prior nor posterior, is nothing else than to be in the same and in an instant. In this case, if those things which are prior and posterior are in the same now, the transactions of 1,000 years past will subsist together with those which are accomplished today, and one thing will not be prior or posterior to another. Such then are the doubts concerning the particulars which belong to time. Right. So we can't have it the other way. If there's just one now, well then, where do the differences of time come from? Okay. Footnote 8 starts here. Aristotle, having shown that the now cannot be another and another, in the next place shows, through two arguments, that neither can the same now, according to number, always remain. If there is not one boundary of any continued finite quantity, whether it is continued according to one dimension as a line, or according to two as a superficies, or according to three as a body. But a line is bounded by 2 points, a superficies by as many as the lines which contain it, and a body by as many as its comprehending superficies. This being the case, it is evident that the now, since it is the boundary of a finite time, will not be one and the same. For every time, which we may assume, though it should be the least finite time, will have one now in the beginning of it and another at the end. Okay, so I didn't get this. Now it's clear. The argument is, for a finite time, a timeline, there has to be point A and point B at the ends of it, but those are supposed to be instants are supposed to be the limits of time, and therefore A should be one instant, B should be another instant. And if A and B can't be the same instant because all finite quantities have multiple boundaries, not just one. And if all nows were the same, all finite times would have one and the same boundary on all sides, but that doesn't work geometrically. For each way, it is bounded by the now, so that the now does not always remain one and the same. But it is necessary to assume a finite time as that which is continued in a right line, of which kind also is time, for such things as these have not one boundary, though there appears to be one boundary of a sphere and a circle, for they are comprehended by one superficies and one line. In the next place, Aristotle shows by another argument that the same now cannot always remain, for if there is always the same now, all things will be in the same now, and there will neither be prior nor posterior. but things which thus subsist together. Hence the most ancient things will exist together with the most recent, for both are in the same now. Okay. So such are the doubts concerning time. And we'll go ahead with chapter 16, quoting Aristotle still. But what time is, and what is its nature from what has been delivered, is similarly immanifest with the things which we have before discussed. For some say that it is the motion of the universe, but others that it is the sphere itself. A part, however, of the revolution of the universe is a certain time, but it is not a revolution, for that which is assumed is a part of the revolution and not the revolution. Again, if there were many heavens, time would be similarly the motion of any of these, so that there would be many times subsisting together. But the sphere of the universe seemed to those who made that assertion to be time, because all things are in time and in the sphere of the universe. So there's a similarity. All things are in time, all things are in the universe. Maybe time is the universe. This assertion, however, is so stupid that it is not requisite to consider the impossibilities with which it is attended. Okay. Footnote 1. Aristotle, having shown from the above arguments that it is immanifest whether time has any existence, in the next place says that he who attempts to consider it from what has been delivered will find that it is similarly immanifest with what has been before discussed, what time is, and what is its nature. It is immanifest, therefore, what it is, since some say that time is the motion and revolution of the universe, which Eudemus, Theophrastus, and Alexander say, Simplicius, conceived to be the opinion of Plato. So we have like peripatetics interpreting Plato unfavorably, probably because Aristotle got the ball rolling in that direction and his followers followed him. But others said that it is the sphere of the heavens, as the Pythagoreans, who perhaps derived this opinion from the assertion of Archytas, who said that the universal time is the interval of the nature of the universe. Some of the Stoics also were of this opinion, but others said that it is motion simply, for Aristotle relates 3 opinions concerning time, omitting the more mythological, in which, from division, he comprehends all in those assumed. For time is either motion, or that which is first moved, which is the sphere of the universe, and if it is motion, it is either every motion, or the motion of the universe. For the conception of time does not admit permanency or anything belonging to permanency. Aristotle, therefore, says but little in opposition to those who assert time to be the circulation of the heavens, but he speaks more copiously against those who say that time is simply the same with motion, and he does not think the opinion that time is the sphere of the universe worthy of contradiction, as being exceedingly absurd. For they appear to have called time the heavens, because all things are in the heavens, and all things are in time. And it is evident that those who are of this opinion are in the first place ignorant of the ambiguity attending the subsistence of one thing in another, to different senses of in, which Aristotle has well defined in his discussion of place, for a subsistence as in time is one thing, as in place another, and as in whole another. So a part in a whole is different numerically. And in the next place, the syllogisms are unskillfully formed, and hence he calls this opinion more stupid, for they syllogize in the second figure, from 2 affirmatives, that heaven, or the sphere of the universe, is that in which all things are contained, and time is that in which all things are contained, and on this account time is the sphere of the universe. But perhaps it might be possible to conclude this in the first figure. Heaven is, so just the form of the syllogism is invalid. Heaven is that in which all things are contained. So he's, I think, reconstructing the syllogism more favorably. But that in which all things are contained is time. So he's trying to construct a first syllogism that it works rather than the way Aristotle delivered it. In the next place, the parts of time are the past and the future, but these are not the parts of a sphere. Another refutation. Time also has its subsistence in becoming to be, but this is not the case with a sphere. And the parts of a sphere are not everywhere, but time is everywhere. For in the same sphere, the older and the younger are contained, but not at the same time. The sphere of the universe, likewise, is a certain corporeal essence, but time is not. This, however, as a most stupid hypothesis, Aristotle does not think worthy of discussion. But he opposes the other, which says that time is the motion and revolution of the universe for a part of the circulation and revolution of the universe, as for instance, a day is, according to the authors of this hypothesis, time, but is not a circulation. For a part of a revolution is neither a revolution nor a circulation, from which Aristotle infers that time is not the circulation of the universe. For if a certain time is a part of the revolution, all time, therefore, is not the revolution. But that a part of the circulation is not circulation, though it be time. Aristotle evinces when he says, quote, a part, however, of the revolution of the universe is a certain time, but it is not a revolution. For a revolution is a motion from the same to the same. And then the universe is said to have made a revolution when each of its parts is restored from the same to the same. But the aforesaid time, such as day or night, is a part of the circulation, but is not a circulation. And if you assume both together, viz. Day and night, this time is more than the circulation of the universe through the motion of the sun. What do you call it? It's a footnote to a footnote here. An astronomical natural day, of which Simplicius is here speaking, is that space of time in which an entire revolution of the equator is performed, together with a portion of the same equator, corresponding to that portion of the ecliptic which the sun in the meantime runs through. For if the sun, indeed, were not moved through the ecliptic, and if it returned with the same point of the equator with which it departed from meridian to meridian, then one entire revolution of the equator would precisely measure a day. But because the sun continually advances, and daily, by nearly 1 degree towards the east, it comes to pass that the point of the equator returning with which the sun departed to the meridian, the sun returns with nearly 1 degree later. This arises partly on account of the obliquity of the zodiac, partly on account of the eccentricity, for through this at one time something more, and at another something less than 1 degree must be added. Hence, some inequality of days is produced. Okay, the actual argument relevant to this, though, I think is simply that it can't be a revolution, because a revolution is a motion from the same to the same, but time, a beginning and end, are not the same. So I think something like that is sufficient. After this, Aristotle adduces another argument against this opinion. For if there were many heavens, says he, that is, worlds, as the followers of Democritus suppose, the revolution of each of these would be time, and thus there would be many times existing together, which is impossible. For it is possible that many motions may subsist together, but it is impossible for many times to be coexistent. For the same now is everywhere the same. Which is simply asserted, but I guess spatial coexistence is kind of predicated on simultaneity. To say two things exist together is to say they exist together at the same time. Okay, so it can't be a motion of the heavens, because if there were multiple heavens, then their respective motions would mean multiple times, but then that eliminates... So actually the argument's pretty solid. They just don't state why it is that you can't have multiple times. Okay. I mean, he says here, the same now is everywhere the same. It could just use more explanation, but it actually makes sense. Simplicius further observes that Alexander, endeavoring to show that it was the opinion of Plato that time is the motion of the heavens, in the first place adduces Eudemus as an evidence of the truth of this, for Eudemus, according to Alexander, says, quote, Plato adopted this opinion, and very absurdly, for he says that prior to the generation of the universe there was confused and disorderly motion. He does not, however, connect line with line, since all motion is in time. In the next place, he does not admit those who assert that Plato, in conformity to the opinion of Aristotle, says that time is the number of motion, when in the Timaeus he calls time an eternal image, proceeding according to number. For he does not, says he, call time the number of motion, but that which is according to the number of motion, which is according to order. Thus far Alexander. Simplicius, however, with his usual acuteness, answers him as follows. In the first place, whence came Eudemus to suspect that Plato called time the circulation of the heavens? In the next place, the absurdity which Alexander adduces does not happen to Plato, that there is time prior to time, for if, says Alexander, all motion is in time, it is evident that confused and disorderly motion also will be in time. If, therefore, such a motion was prior to the generation of the universe, time also is prior to the circulation of the heavens. Hence, if there was this time, time will be prior to time. In answer to this, it is necessary to observe that we shall then understand how Plato says that time is an eternal image moving according to number, when we understand Aristotle's definition of time, that it is the number of motion. And Eudemus appears to have conceived that Plato called time the circulation of the heavens, from the following passages in the Timaeus. Okay, so we can, just to resolve that ambiguity, Plato does say there was a discordant and confused, or disorderly and confused motion before the arrangement of the cosmos, but he also makes it clear briefly that when he's talking about time in that discussion in the Timaeus, he's going to have to say some things that are technically inaccurate. It's just how we are able to talk about it. And so when he says that disorderly motion is prior to the construction of the cosmos, I think he means that that's the default state of space and matter, and connect that with Aristotle's definition of matter. It is just the most rudimentary, massive quantity in what it does, bound up with space and extension. So I think that's why he says it's prior to, but that wasn't quite addressed here in Simplicius. And Eudemus appears to have conceived that Plato called time the circulation of the heavens from the following passage in the Timaeus, quote, From hence, therefore, night and day arose, and through these revolving bodies the period of one most wise circulation was produced. And month, indeed, was generated when the moon, having run through her circle, passed into conjunction with the sun, but year when the sun had completely wandered round his orb. As to the periods of the other stars, they are not understood except by a very few of mankind, nor do the multitude distinguish them by any particular or peculiar appellation, nor do they measure them with relation to each other regarding the numbers adapted to this purpose. Hence it may be said they are ignorant that the wanderings of these bodies are in reality time. And thus he appears to say that each period is a certain time, and that the one period of the universe is the whole of time. For he says, quote, that the perfect number of time will then accomplish a perfect year, when the 8 circulations, concurring in their courses with each other, become bounded by the same extremity, being at the same time measured by the circle subsisting according to sameness. That Plato does not call time the motion of the celestial orbs, but the measure of motion, is evident from the above quotations. For when he says that the multitude, in consequence of not knowing that the periods of the heavenly bodies are measured by numbers, are also ignorant that the wanderings of these bodies are time, he evidently shows that time possesses its essence through being the measure of motions. So it's not that the wanderings of the bodies are time, but the measure of those wanderings is time, which is coherent with the text. But we shall still more clearly learn that Plato does not call motion and time the same if we find that when the universe was now moving according to reason, through the participation of soul, he then introduces time as the measure of motion. For he thus speaks in the Timaeus, after the animation of the corporeal nature of the universe, quote, "But when the generating Father understood that this generated resemblance of the eternal gods moved and lived, he was delighted with his work, and in consequence of this delight considered how he might fabricate it still more similar to its exemplar. Hence, as that is an eternal animal, the exemplar, he endeavored to render this universe such as the utmost of his ability. Such to the utmost of his ability. The nature, indeed, of the animal, its paradigm, is eternal, and this it is impossible to adapt perfectly to a generated effect. Hence he determined by a dianoetic energy to produce a certain movable image of eternity. And thus, while he was distributing and adorning the universe, he at the same time formed an eternal image flowing according to number of eternity, abiding in one, and which receives from us the appellation of time, according to number of eternity. And it is evident indeed that though all things were constituted at once by the demiurge, the narration indicates their order with respect to each other. For if time was generated together with the universe, as is evident from what Plato says shortly after, it follows that the one did not precede the other in time. And how can any part of time be prior to time? But if the demiurge introduced time to the universe when it was already in motion, it is evident that time and motion, according to Plato, are not the same. But in a certain respect, time is perfective of motion. Interesting. So he's really going with that motion is prior to time. Time is like a measure on motion. That is really cool because I can think of, quantum mechanics type arguments. People have argued that the arrow of time is kind of a macroscopic effect. And then the motions, the disorderly, chaotic motions at the bottom level are perfected by these measures. So time is a classical reality phenomenon, not a quantum reality phenomenon. So this actually could work. This is good. And when Plato says that the whole of a visible nature was moved in a confused and disorderly manner prior to the generation of the world, he does not mean, as the words seem to indicate, that a disorderly, sensible nature once presubsisted in time, and that the demiurge afterwards, as if rising from a certain sleep, arranged it in order. For if he fabricated the world through goodness, and his goodness is always perfect and in energy, and essentially imparts good to all things, demiurgic providence is evidently consubsistent with the goodness of deity. But Plato, in thus speaking, indicates that the demiurge is the cause of order and ornament to the universe, which, considered in itself, independent of the supernatural powers which it receives from an intellectual and divine soul, is full of a confused and disorderly motion. So, outside of the order that it receives from the universe, the nature of nature would be that confused and disorderly motion. If therefore all motion is in time, it also is evident that the confused and disorderly time subsisting with such a motion is nothing more than a certain adumbration of perfect time, according to the hypothesis of the narration. Okay, so maybe it's not that time altogether is the perfection of motion. We can have an imperfect time co-subsisting with the disorderly motion. That's fine. We can just leave it at that. Now scroll all the way to where this started. Was this footnote 1? Okay. This assertion, however, is so stupid, etc. But since time especially appears to be motion and mutation, this must be considered. The mutation, therefore, and motion of everything is in that alone which is changed, or wherever that may be which is moved and changed, but time is similarly everywhere, and with all things. Besides, every mutation is swifter and slower, but time is not, for the slow and the swift are defined by time, since that is swift which is moved which is much moved in a short time, and that is slow, which is but a little moved in a long time. But time is not defined by time, neither because it is a certain quantity, nor because it is a certain quality. It is evident, therefore, that time is not motion. But there is no difference whether at present we say it is not motion or that it is not mutation. So we're not yet differentiating between motion and mutation. In any case, time is not simply motion, because the qualities that characterize motion are not the same as those which characterize time, and for other reasons we've already seen. So, all right, we'll move on with chapter 17, still on time, arriving at Aristotle's notion of time, which we've already kind of previewed in the footnotes, is going to be the measure of motion, not motion itself. So that will be good. I'll see if I can get to this during the week, if I have time, but maybe then, if not, just next Saturday. We're going to stop a little bit early. We could probably keep going all the way up to the hour, but my voice is kind of tired. I mean, we could have someone else read, but let's just give ourselves a break. And yep, thanks for joining today. Have a great week. Take care.